Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Vickery with the Texas Access to Justice Foundation. Along with me is Lisa Melton, Isak Harrington, and Janine Lisa. And we want to thank you for taking the time to attend this presentation on the Foundation's webinar, 2019 webinar, on how to make an omelet without breaking an egg. I'm just joking. That's my one joke. They told me I could only tell one joke. Again, the goal of this webinar is there's four goals, really. Promote common understanding and expectation regarding SAR reports, create uniformity in the data collected, improve quality and accuracy of the data collected, and reduce time for grantee and the foundation in subsequent reviewing and correcting or editing the data after submission. Oh, one housekeeping item, if everyone could make sure you don't put us on hold, or you might want to turn off your phone or cell phone, or just fewer distractions. The self-assessment report has been an important tool for the foundation in administering the millions of dollars of grants that we are responsible for that support legal aid. And we've been tasked by the Supreme Court. So we take these responsibilities extremely serious. One of the things that we look at, and also things we look at when we do site visits, is the quality and effectiveness of the grantees' operations and services. And we assess the accuracy of the information provided in the grant application. Now, the accuracy of the case information submitted is vital to obtaining continued state and public funding for legal services. We use the data. Maybe if you thought about the many uses, how this data is used in the aggregate, you'd see why we are extremely committed to making sure the data is as accurate as possible, because we use it for summaries that we provide to the Board of Directors of the Foundation. We provide the data to the Legislative Budget Board and the legislature during the session and inquiries outside of session. We also are required to provide 2 reports to the Supreme Court annually. We use the self-assessment report for the site visits. Also, we use it for rating grant applications when there's new money available or less money. Difficult decisions have to be made, and the SAR is extremely helpful. And of course, we use it in our communications material in terms of promoting legal aid and the importance thereof. Annually, the American Bar Association and the National Association for IALTA programs request the aggregated data. They pull it together nationally and then report on that. One of the things we're going to be doing this year is that we'll be requiring and having grantees certify that they will provide a copy of their SAR to their board chair and board once submitted. And also, we're going to ask for the name of the person who reviewed the SAR prior to submitting. Now, if the executive director is the one that's named, then of course they're going to be responsible for the clarity and proofing of the entire document for submission. Now, you can see there's a lot of benefit from our standpoint, but we also think about what benefits you as well. And we think that you would use this as a management tool, comparing from previous years, measuring progress. Also, you could use it for marketing and resource development. It would also be wise to share with staff so they can get an opportunity to see the big picture and the summary of all the advocacy going on during the calendar year. Now, case statistics are an important indicator in evaluating a grantee's work. However, it's not taken alone, and it's not solely determinative of the effectiveness of the grant program. And that is why there's narratives and other data collection besides just case statistics. Also keep in mind that these records and materials are subject to open records requests or third-party requests. So you're submitting to a larger audience than you can imagine. We would strongly suggest that before you begin the process of the self-help self-assessment report that you review the prior 2 years. What did you report to us previously? And if there's any variances, and if there are variances, you might explain them in the narrative so it would not require us to follow up. Copy and paste is a convenience. We appreciate it, but it should not be abused. And there have been times when we've seen exact copy and paste for several years in a row. We'll talk about that further. But these are the things that we look at when we have to follow up and contact the grantees after we receive your report. Now, before we begin, we have 3 examples of weak data collection from 3 different grantees who will remain anonymous. Now, we'd like you to read quickly each brief scenario, and at the end of the presentation, tell us by email which grantee should not be funded, 1, 2, or 3. All right, next. And this is grantee 1. And now grantee 2. And we'll move to grantee 3. All right, a little levity, hopefully. There's chuckles that we can't hear. Otherwise, it's just another bomb laid by Jonathan Vickery. This slide really is just some general hints and things to consider. And by the way, the PowerPoint presentation will be made available sometime after today. And also, I believe there's going to be a recording. Although after we listen to it, we may want to think twice about that. Depends on how this goes. This slide, the need to be timely and accurate is important. Timely is something I want to touch upon. Often, some grantees will ask for extensions, and we want to be flexible and we want to be assist anyway. However, the extensions come at a cost for us. Usually around March of every year, we start getting the inquiries for the aggregated data. And we can't run any reports until we've had an opportunity to review each and every self-assessment report and verify that the data is accurate and timely. So if we have a number of extensions, we have a number of people preventing us from running the aggregate report. So keep that in mind. Also, if you wait to the last minute, you could experience technical difficulties. I've heard that happens. So it's probably wise not to wait till the last day or two before you want to get it submitted. But we understand how pressured you all are. You have many things on your plate. Also, know what is eligible to be reported in the case service report. What should go in there and what should not go in there. Basically, and there's definitions and materials I'll talk about in a minute, but the legal civil cases, income eligible, and they must be free. And that free includes any appointment fee or consultation fee. If the applicant or client pays any funds to access your services, then it cannot be considered free legal aid, and it should not go in there. Also, there's turnover in staff, and we can appreciate that, but you should remember that if it's a new person working on these reports, they need to be oriented, they need to be trained. I cannot tell you the number of times we go over the same information, things we've already shared time and time again, and it takes up your time, your staff's time, and our time as well. Let's go next. And there was supposed to be some kind of, you can raise hands, and I'm not sure how you do that, but we wanted to survey just, is anybody using any of your data in the self-assessment report for grant applications? We were just curious because it is important. We want the benefit not only to be for us, but also for you, because we know it takes a good deal of time to pull this information together. All right, next. And this is the screen where you will be able to access a multitude of resources and references, material that should be reviewed before you begin entering data. It's extremely crucial and important. The data has to be uniform, it has to be consistent. Otherwise, it really is, as they say, garbage in, garbage out. And we need to make sure that we're reporting numbers that we can rely upon. This is a grant component that you'll be able to access all the materials that are in the web grants folder, and it's that opportunity topic that you click on. All right, next. And these are the components of the self-assessment report. We're going to review most of them, if not all of them, but some quicker than others. But we try to look at topics in what should be self-explanatory, but we often realize it's not. Let's see. There's also going to be questions. We're going to try to take some questions after each of the components, but we have a lot of attendees, and if after each component, if you do have a question, we may take one, but we may have to take others either offline. Also, each of you have your own personal program officer who just loves talking to you one-on-one, and you should certainly take advantage of that. And finally, one of the things we've been extremely successful in the last several years, and I say we, but it's the leadership of our executive director, Betty Bally-Torres, is leveraging resources and bringing additional out-of-state dollars into Texas to support legal aid, along with some other revenue streams. But we need this data that we're able to channel and put in a form that will be the best format in convincing other funders and other philanthropic organizations to support the Texas programs. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Melton, and she's going to cover the next several slides. Lisa?
Good morning. I'm going to begin with discussion of the executive summary. The executive summary.
I'm not hearing you, Lisa.
You don't hear me? I'm on. I'm on.
Do we have already our first technical difficulty?
Everyone can hear me but you, Jonathan. They all hear me.
Am I hearing anyone?
I'm going to continue to go, and I'll try not to put Jonathan out of my mind, his voice out of my mind. The executive summary is arguably the most important section of this report. Defined, an executive summary is a short document or section of a document produced as a summary of a longer report in such a way that readers can rapidly become acquainted with a large body of material without having to read it all. In the context of the SAR, it should contain a brief statement of the conclusions to be drawn from the reported material, including a concise analysis and main conclusions. One example that stood out to me when I was reviewing executive summaries was one from an immigration program, who shall remain nameless. And this is an outstanding kind of intro to an executive summary. As with 2017, 2018 was full of constant change and turmoil. Zero tolerance and family separation, the end of TPS for many, court orders on DACA, restrictions on gang and domestic violence asylum seekers, and many harsh policy changes. We also saw continued policy and practice changes resulting in cases requiring more work and more evidence and taking longer to close. These changes made our caseloads bigger and the number of cases we could close smaller than in past years. Through all the turmoil, XLAP remained responsive to our clients and flexible in our ability to meet the shifting demands. They had someone, not just someone who's putting in data, but someone who can kind of mold the big picture of what this self-assessment report is going to tell us when compared to previous years, because we do compare it to previous years. And I recommend for executive directors and managing attorneys or whomever is reviewing this report before it comes to the foundation, that you look at this report in the context of the previous 2 years, because we're going in 2019, we're going to look at 2018 and 2017 as we compare the data changes in your report. So this person has done this for me and told me why it is that their caseload is bigger, but they've closed fewer cases. They're going to have more open cases as compared to previous years, but they're going to have closed fewer. They've told me the challenges that they've had throughout this year and how they've had to become flexible and be able to shift how they do work in order to meet this rapidly shifting environment of immigration. Why is this section so important to the foundation? This is where you will set the narrative about how your legal aid program performed in the reported year. This is where you shape my understanding as your program officer about what I am about to review. And for all the others at the foundation, like Betty or Jonathan, this is as far as they're going to get in reviewing the report. Your program officer is going to do a thorough review. But Jonathan, as director of grants and the associate director of the foundation, is not going to have time. He may go look at a data point at some point because he's got a question, but for the most part, if he gets to see anything, it's going to be the executive summary. And that's where you're going to tell your story to those who are more impactful in the organization than your program officer. So the features of a solid executive summary include succinctly telling me who you are and why you matter. What is your raison d'etre? I need to know in a couple of sentences why your organization needs to exist, needs to continue existing. And you think, my God, Lisa, you know that. You've been working at the foundation since 1998. You know all about us. Well, maybe I do, but maybe I don't, because I don't feel like what you're telling me presents to me a dynamic organization that is continuing to be relevant in the work that we're doing in our community. So, you know, some kind of, this is a big area where we see cut and paste. And I really challenge you not to do that. Don't cut and paste and just put in what you put in last year with maybe just changing the numbers to the numbers of cases closed or something like that. Tell me why you're relevant today, why you matter today. Then tell me 2 accomplishments, 2 or more or less or whatever. Give me some impactful accomplishments achieved with TGIF funding. This is not, you know, later in the self-assessment report, you're going to have an opportunity to tell us about cases. So this is not where we want to hear about cases necessarily. And again, I have an example from an immigration program. Our most significant programmatic accomplishment was our ability to respond to crises. When the zero tolerance policy hit, we suddenly saw women at Hutto Detention Center who'd been separated from their children. We responded by prioritizing those cases and helping families unite. We saw men and their sons detained at Carnes. We adapted our LOP program to be responsive to them. We also saw an outpouring of community interest and support, and used that opportunity to hold community learning sessions where hundreds of members of the general public came to get accurate, up-to-date information. We held a massive citizenship workshop, and dozens of pro bono attorneys and volunteers. We created a new pro bono program to use the increased attorney interest to provide CFI, RFI preparation for Hutto detainees and attorneys from across the country. So this is telling that we created DACA clinics to use pro bono attorneys to help DACA clients reapply. So this told us how they were responsive in a period of dynamic change, and how TGIF funds helped them do that. Another example is from an LSC program where they talked about the accomplishment of, through a collaboration around disaster work that they were having with the other LSC programs, they moved to a uniform case management platform, resulting that they will eventually will impact all of legal services among the 3 LSC programs at a minimum throughout the state. So giving us those kinds of examples is very important. The other thing is, and you'll see this in the slide, Manage the data that you're sharing with us. Use it to tell your story of the past year. And you can see the example that I've given there. They're telling us a little bit about demography. They're telling us why of the applicants that they screened, why all of those cases were not closed or weren't either closed and remain open. They're telling us that some of those clients were not eligible. Over 29% of the applicants were over income. So give me some analysis of the data, as thoughtful as you can be in the time allotted. Then give us a major change. If there's been a major change in your organization that we should know about, a lot of times that's a change in an executive director or some other key staff person, a change in your board in some way. If so, tell us of that major change. If there's none, just say there's none. Just say we didn't have any major changes this year that warrant discussion here. And then something of significance that made your ability to deliver services notably changed, for the good or the bad. And you can see the example that we've given there. Are there any questions about executive summaries before we move on? Janine, can you change the slide, please? The next slide that we're going to go over is the slide that deals with those people who are providing, who are receiving, providing and receiving direct representation in your program. Whether a permanent employee, temporary employee, full-time employee, staff, part-time employee, or a contract employee who are working not by the case but for a set rate of pay in terms of salary or contracted for amount to work in-house are classified as staff attorneys. So those are the cases that are going to be closed by the staff attorneys in your program. The next category is pro bono private attorneys, those attorneys in the private sector who volunteer with no expectation of a fee to represent your clients. And then finally, the compensated reduced fee private attorney cases closed. This is something that is not used as frequently as it once was, as pro bono has become so much more robust. But still, in some rural parts of the state, it may be that there just is no one who can really provide pro bono services, and they're not going to do it without some pecuniary enticement. And so this references those attorneys, sometimes called Judicare attorneys or reduced fee panel attorneys. And these are private contract panels and are paid a significantly reduced fee by the grantee to provide free legal services to individual persons who would be eligible for legal services under the program's eligibility guidelines. For section number 2, rejected applicants or less than full representation, we have changed this slightly. For number 2 in the section following, do the best you can to answer these questions fully and accurately in 2019, and begin now to set up whatever data collection changes you need to collect it fully and report it accurately in 2020. So 2019, for these next 2 sections, the one entitled 2, rejected applicants or less than full representation, and then the following one, TJEF closed cases, do the very best you can in 2019, but ramp up to begin reporting this so you can report it accurately in 2020. Number 2 was a combined total prior to this year. We have just changed this data point so that you provide a number of income eligible applicants who are rejected without any legal services provided, and then you provide a second number, which is those who received some legal service but something short of what was needed. And note that we say something short of what was requested and merited. So, you know, just because a client wants something, unless it is something that would be feasible within the legal within the ability of the program to provide legal services, then we want it to be legally reasonable. So in the first data point, it's those who are applicants. Their status would qualify them as applicants. They are not clients. And those applicants were turned away for lack of resources. That's the only reason. It's not because otherwise they were eligible. They were income eligible, and it's not that it was a criminal case. It was a civil case, something that you ordinarily could help them with, but they were turned away because of resources. And then the second one is actually now a client of the organization. They've received something, but what they have received is short of what would be ideal for them in terms of resolving their legal problem. And then the reason for the next change is, and this is TJEF closed cases, is that we have budgets that allocate 85% of one full-time employee over 11 attorneys. That is not even our most extreme example. It's just one that I picked up when reviewing budgets this past time. So this is not the most extreme case of spreading foundation funds across a grantee organization. We need a good faith demonstration that grantees are aware that they are to be able to account for not just the funds, but the time allocated professionals and non-professionals are spending on foundation funded work. We are concerned about accountability, and we have a great deal of accountability that we have to engage in with the entities that are making this money available. That's the legislature, as you know, and the Supreme Court of Texas, and the Attorney General. So we need to know with every confidence, and so when we see 0.85 FTE allocated over 11 attorneys, then if something goes awry and the legal services funding that was provided for a specific purpose don't get used in that way, I have a feeling that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is going to say to Betty, well, I mean, really, shouldn't your staff have known? I mean, it wasn't that a red flag that you have less than one person who's being allocated over 11 attorneys? So we want to know that you can account for the casework that TJEF is funding, or that the foundation is funding. So if you can't be accountable, then we can't be accountable. Are there any questions on that sheet?
We do have one question.
Okay.
Would advice and counsel or referral to another entity count as rejected before legal services or less than legal services requested?
If advice and counsel is given, then I would say someone has provided a legal service, an attorney-client relationship has attached, and that is a case that would fall under, and that's a client now. You give someone legal advice, then you have made them your client. For the one that is referred to another agency, it depends on why they were referred. If they were referred because it's a criminal case and your organization can't handle that, even if they were income eligible, then that is not someone who would be counted under number of income eligible applicants rejected before legal services were rendered. That's just a referral. So number of, if it is a case where they're referred to another civil legal services provider because you don't have capacity to represent them, and another entity that might be able to, then that is someone who's rejected. If they were income eligible for your services and otherwise they would qualify for your services based on the kind of case that they have, and you referred them, then you would count them under number one. Is that clear?
We do have one other question.
Sure.
What do you mean the percentage of the case was closed using TAJF funds?
So prior to this year, the question was, Please record closed cases. I'm getting some sort of, somebody's not muted. It may be Janine. So we would say before, how many of your closed cases, I can't remember exactly how the question was worded, and we should have provided that. That would have been a good thing. But anyway, this is different. But the question before was basically one number. We were just asking for one number, and that one number was how many cases were closed using TGEF funding. Well, that number, you know, we can look at your budget and know that you have funding from other sources. And that number would be almost as big as your total closed cases, or it might even be as big as your total closed cases. In other words, we're the only funder, or we're a funder that has been spread over the entire organization. And so we want to know exactly that in these figures, we are getting cases that are closed that were somehow funded in part by TGEF money. So maybe that case was only funded with TGEF money at 5% of TGEF funding. So 95% of that case, the support on that case, was funded by another source, but 5% was funded by TGEF. Then that case would go in. Then that one case would go in number of cases closed at 1% to 5%. And so on. So we're asking you to, what used to be given as just a total, we're asking you to break down based on the percentages that are listed there. And then the bottom will be a total. Does that make sense? And then the final question that it's kind of at the bottom, and I forgot to address, is just giving us some explanation, some good explanation that can help us understand how you are mining your data within your organization. Doesn't have to be really lengthy, but it does have to be something more than we ran a report in our case management system. Tell us what report you ran, what parameters you used. How are you utilizing your case management systems to track that should be system, to track the information you provided in the section above, TGEF closed cases. So how, give us some idea of the reports you're running. And the next slide is on the governing body, or the board of directors of your organization. And as Jonathan mentioned, going forward, the foundation will require that the completed SAR be provided to each grantee's board of directors, similar to the site visit report. And, I have to say, sometimes I feel like it's the whole schoolyard thing where everybody in the class has to sit out recess because one person, one little boy pulled one little girl's pigtails on the playground. That's probably a really bad example that shows my age or something, and my lack of sensitivity to something. But anyway, the fact is, I don't like that we have to become more I'm not sure what the word is, but more monitoring. But because there are times when information doesn't make sense to us, and even when we drill down, it doesn't make sense to us. And sometimes when that happens, we actually unearth problems in programs that we feel as though if we ask questions better, we would have better information. And we also sometimes just feel like we have to change these questions up a little bit just to keep y'all engaged in answering them, because it does become such a rote kind of process. So, and we look at this document every time before a site visit. So, and we provide it to our peer reviewers when we go on the larger site visits. And it's funny how they find out through conversations with board members and even sometimes the executive director, who's not quite as plugged in maybe to what they're reporting as he or she might be, that it doesn't jive. You know, what they're hearing from the board chair doesn't recall the last time they evaluated the executive director. But the executive director, as it has been reported in the SAR, is, you know, religiously evaluated in writing by the board of directors like clockwork every 12 months. And so we just want to ensure that everybody understands that when we're talking about this piece of it, this is not just the responsibility of the staff person who's putting this information in, but if you're saying things about the governing body and about what they're doing, then the governing body needs to be aware, and they need to be plugged into this part of the process, at least to some extent, at least to be informed about what is being reported. So the new items which are highlighted are what many would say are the hallmarks of effective nonprofit governance. That includes drilling down a little bit further, delving a little bit further into board of directors contributions and trying to elevate that a little bit in this report so that you can elevate it with your board and you can use us to do it. Just say, hey, the foundation is concerned about this. This is what they're looking at, and use us to do it. Then the other things are these financial reports that are being provided where actual expenditures are compared to approved budgets, and the board of directors receipt of comparative data that shows the effectiveness and quality of the program, what is being provided. And when we go on site, we'll want to see what those reports are, what financial reports are given to the board of directors, what qualitative and quantitative comparative data with regard to services being provided are given to the board of directors. So we've added those two questions. The first is not an add, it is a further analysis. So the board of directors, we've always asked what's the percentage of contributions, and whether they're actively engaged in raising funds for the organization. And we've asked those two questions. Now we're asking for the largest single contribution and then the total amount provided by board members. We didn't want to ask for the smallest. We're not focused on the smallest, but it will tell us something if your board generated $1,000 and 900 of it was given by one board member and you have 12 board members. So we just kind of want to delve into that information. This may not be something that this is kind of a trial balloon. We'll see how it goes. We may need to refine it at some point, but this is the way that we've kind of determined to ask these questions now, because we want your board to appreciate the significance of giving. The other things that we're asking about: the written evaluation of the executive director, the succession plan, the communication plan, the resource development plan, the technology plan, and the business continuity disaster plan are all features of a well-run or a nonprofit organization, just like they are in the business world. And they're documents that we expect are living, breathing, integral documents that are integral to the organizational management of your nonprofit. So we will, be reviewing those during our site visit every year or every 3 years, and we want to have it reported here that they are continuing to be reviewed and updated, since we know that all of these things can kind of go out of relevance in our organizations. Are there any questions? I believe it's time for me to turn my mic over.
Well, so as we delve a little deeper into the narrative section of the SAR, I just want to send out a little friendly reminder that narratives should really just focus on highlights, major achievements, and compelling stories. Should not repeat what was provided in previous year or years, and should focus on TAJA funding activities and benefits provided to the client community. The activities section that in the SAR has two sections. One is activities A and activities B. And both of these sections include modifications, revisions, and deletions. So here, as you can see in the green, is on the lawyer's salary section, it's been modified. The American Bar Association standards section has been deleted, and the needs section has been moved to a latter part of the SAR. Next. So getting into the activities A section a little bit more. I mean, again, we're looking at y'all to provide us just rounding out the organization a little bit more, and on collaboration, especially. We know that you guys collaborate with other organizations. I mean, it's essential. You wouldn't exist if you didn't. But we want to know a little bit more about what that collaboration. We want two stories and how that collaboration really, the essence of your organization and how it highlighted your work with another organization that was not that was outside of the normal scope of collaboration that you normally have with outside organizations. So essentially, we would like for you guys to tell the foundation how you work with another community organization to achieve a unique and compelling goal throughout the year. Explain what made that collaboration important in achieving that goal, and explain the achievement's impact on the client or the community. And as far as the contribution to the statewide site, the Texas Law Help website, we ask organizations to contribute annually. We really want to know the description of what that contribution was. I mean, we get one-liners sometimes about what you did, but what you're aiming to achieve with that contribution. If you've been making that same contribution over and over the years, or if the current law hasn't changed the nature and the scope of your annual contribution, then it's probably a good time to reach out to Texas Law Help and see how else your organization may be able to contribute additionally. On the lawyer salary component, the only change that you'll see here is it's sort of, I mean, it maintains a breakdown in lawyers starting salaries 5 years to not 10 years, 10 years to 20 and 20 years or more. The only change here is how many attorneys fit into each of these categories. Some organizations I've seen will add an additional narrative here about the different, because their categories don't line up necessarily, but we still, in each of the categories and how you break it down, would like to see how many attorneys are in those categories. Next. And here is activities B. And we're looking at on the overview of legal services. So we're looking at summaries of the project or legal services that were provided with each funding source. And just keep in mind that we're looking for each funding source. So if you're an organization that receives multiple grants from the foundation, BCLS discretionary or low income, CDCLS, et cetera, then there should be a summary of legal services related to each grant. On language access, the question has been revised a little bit. What has your organization done in the last 12 months to improve language access for all limited and non-English speaking clients? On the staff development narrative, please answer the following questions. What system do you have in place to communicate training opportunities to your staff? So who's in charge of making sure staff are apprised of professional trainings, and how do you do it? Are there quarterly organizational-wide e-blasts sent out? How do you all communicate that? And how do you ensure that all levels of staff are receiving ongoing training? How do you keep them motivated, educated? And just keep in mind that we're looking for all staff. This isn't just pertaining to attorneys. On the challenges component, it's another question that was revised. I mean, the big takeaway here is, you know, we all understand that the lack of funding is a challenge, and it's a challenge for all organizations. But that aside, we'd like to know what challenges there are that aren't necessarily related to the lack of funding. And additionally, as in the overview of legal services activities funded section, we want to make sure that there's a challenge narrative for each grant program, not just overall, but that if you receive multiple funding opportunities, that you should also be including a challenge narrative for each of those opportunities. Next. Lisa, this is you.
Yes, this is me. And as most of you should probably know, we're devoting, can you hear me? We are devoting an entire webinar to this section next week, October 2nd, Wednesday, October 2nd, beginning at 10:30 a.m. I'm going to give you a brief overview of that session so that you know why you must have the right people attend this session. The Wednesday, October 2nd session on storytelling addresses the growing support inside the social sector for the idea that telling personal, deeply human stories is an essential part of creating change, not just raising money, not just getting support locally, but for affecting change. That storytelling is commonly resisted as a practice by staff and advocates who often view it as inherently victimizing to already marginalized communities. And that is, I think, an ethos that we all share. It is a major concern. Research shows that evoking pity is more likely to raise money for short-term goals and services, but it's also more likely to more deeply embed stereotypes that make long-term social and policy change more difficult. The foundation and our grantees wrestle with how to tell stories in an impactful and ethical way. And our thinking at the foundation is evolving. What's clear is that social service organizations on a whole aren't doing enough to put users of services and the people most affected by any given issue in the driver's seat when it comes to framing and sharing their own story. Storytelling really should be owned by the individuals who are affected by the story. It's that old saying, it's theirs to tell. It's not probably their lawyers to tell, it's not their social workers to tell, it's not TJFs to tell, it's theirs to tell. And the closer that we can get to our storytelling in honoring that ethos, then the more effective we will be at getting us all what we need from our stories. In next week's webinar, attendees will look briefly at what the research says and discuss tangible strategies that organizations can take to partner with people who use their stories to shape the stories they tell, both about individuals and about broader policies. This webinar is going to be great for both your frontline staff who are wrestling with how to find and share stories, as well as for your communication and development team members. So we really hope that you will all join us, and based on what we hear and based on what we heard at Poverty Law from the outstanding storytelling keynote session that we heard, you may see this success story. I hope we'll see it, what we receive from it, evolve. I don't know that exactly what we're asking for here will evolve, but I hope who begins to tell the stories and the way in which TJF is able to capture the stories. And we're not looking for 20 stories. We're looking for just 1 or 2 stories that are able to be told in the way in which we're kind of moving, that will be able to evolve that. So thank you. Are there any questions?
Well, here we're at the case service report, and this is for closed cases, the closed cases service report. We refer to this section as the CSR. So if you hear that, that's what we're speaking about. And this is a section where you report on certain closed cases broken down by category corresponding to the highest level of service your organization provided. And just because we see a lot, there's discrepancies here between a couple of different numbers, I just want to point out that the total number that you would see at the bottom right after everything's been tallied up in this section will correspond to a previous section's number. And that was, Lisa was discussing this back in slide 7 under the direct civil legal representation of low-income people. Those 2 numbers are going to be the same. So we do see discrepancies there, and we follow up with grantees when we see that, but just so that we can kind of cut that out, like circumvent that, it'd be good if you guys are comparing those 2 numbers. So the types of cases closed that are reported here, and so these are all closed cases for low-income individuals, regardless of funding, and that's what we're including here. So clients and cases meet the definition of low-income individuals, either as defined by the TAJF income eligibility guidelines or LSC income eligibility guidelines. You got to remember that the legal services you provided were free, and that means that clients didn't make any payments for consultations, appointment fees, or you gave them those services on a reduced fee, and then that the case meets the definition of a case. And in the instructions part at the top of this slide, you'll see that those definitions are found under the TAJF reporting of cases, definitions, and descriptions in the attachment sections, opportunity components, and web grants. And so that outlines, that'll detail each of these categories: counsel and advice, limited action, all the way across the top. We do see quite a bit of questions on counsel and advice versus legal information. But to be considered a closed case, your program must have accepted the case and established an attorney-client relationship. And that is different from legal information, because that attorney-client relationship is not established. So giving out legal information, going to clinics where you give out general legal information does not constitute the most basic of closed cases here under counsel and advice. Next. And this next slide is just I mean, these next two slides actually are definitions on the categories for the most part. And like I said, the counsel and advice versus legal information does create some confusion, but it's here. Limited action is more than the counsel and advice, but we hope that the definition provided are detailed enough and explain the situation. Now, obviously, that's not going to help in every interaction, every relationship you have with the client. But if it doesn't fit neatly within these categories, obviously, please feel free to give us a call and we can help you walk through it.
Isaac, we do have one question.
Yes.
Previously, we would identify numbers of closed cases using TAJF funds and then total cases closed. The CSR matched the total closed cases. We have funding services that go above TAJF guidelines, but we include them in the CSR. Is that now only cases that use TAJF funds?
Jonathan, do you want to answer that?
Well, I'm not sure. I'd have to have the question, but I mean, the CSR is to capture low-income civil legal aid, and income eligibility is TAJF or LSC guidelines, but regardless of funding. So if you get a OVAG grant or you get a HUD grant to provide services, I mean, you'd include those cases that were closed. We're trying to get the big number, the amount of civil legal aid in Texas that's being delivered free. So if the question is, are we just looking for TAJF numbers? The answer is no. Okay, that's.
And that will coincide with that direction earlier in the earlier slides, where where direct civil legal representation of low-income people, because that's TAJF funded and non-TAJF funded cases. So, nice, thank you, Jonathan.
All right, are we next here? All right, I think it's my turn. Client profile. It's kind of self-explanatory. However, there are certain sections that should reconcile with each other. For an example, this section should reconcile with the number of cases closed. However, there is one factor. If you do not have the ethnicity of clients for some reason, then it may not. But it should be intentional. if it doesn't reconcile with the cases closed. And the same is true with the gender. Again, we're trying to capture and identify who's getting legal aid help and who's not, what communities and populations are being served and which ones are not. It helps us be able to identify and articulate the need and where there's unmet legal needs. And in the individuals by profile category, these numbers don't have to reconcile, because you could have a homeless veteran and you would click put both homeless and a veteran. It doesn't matter. We're not looking at the particular type of problem they're looking for help. We're really looking at what's going on in their lives, individual lives. So even if you had a homeless person that was coming in regarding a family law matter, it doesn't matter. They're still homeless, and you check it and try to be as accurate as you can and inclusive as you can. It's helpful for reporting purposes. I think that's all. Next. All right, cases closed by county and cases still open. First, on closed by county, you identify which counties you'd like to serve in your grant application. Based upon what you provide us, if your application is approved and funded, then we have you in one of our regions. We divided Texas up by 3 regions, and we have each region has its own list of counties, and each region has poverty population data as well as other geographic data, demographic data. It's important that people offer the services in the counties that they identified. We allocate funds when we're making recommendations. We have to make sure that we're spreading funds around proportionately where the poverty population resides. And so each region will have a certain amount of funds dedicated to it as best as possible. If people are not reporting cases or consistent with their grant application, then it provides faulty information. We couldn't tell the public or the board or the legislature that this region received this amount of money for services if grantees are not true to their word. So that's the reason why we collect closed cases, and also assess where people are getting help. Open is open as of December 31st, the day before the calendar year that you're reporting on. That tells us what you're carrying over. It's really productivity. You can have a low caseload of cases closed, but high open cases, depending upon the practice area, and vice versa. You could have a lot of cases closed, but only a far lesser number in open cases. But it tells us, again, what counties are getting help and where they are. So it helps us in planning and strategizing for the future. Let's see, is there a question, Janine?
Yeah, we do have a question. If a client with permanent residence in, say, Bandera County comes temporarily into an emergency shelter in Bexar County, receives services in Bexar, but has the plan to return to Bandera, do we count them as a Bandera client or a Bexar client?
You would count the residents as opposed to where the legal problem is, I would think, to be consistent. Because it's not uncommon to have cases being handled in different locations from where the client is residing. And that's what we're trying to do, determine not where legal matters are taking place, but what population, what regions are being served. And so if the question is what I think it says, you just look at the county of residence. Okay, no other questions. Next. Self-represented assistance. These are activities that many programs provide, but you can't report them in the CSR, case service report, because you're not establishing a attorney-client relationship in order to give advice per se. Now, there's some leeway in terms of what is assisted pro se versus pro se assistance. But again, the idea is to identify other advocacy activity or support efforts for clients to assist themselves. Well, they're not really clients, for the public to be able to assist and navigate through the legal system. And that's simply all we're trying to report. And sometimes we would expect that you keep these numbers. Other times you would might have to do some projections, good faith projections, but do the best that you can. It's a very helpful information, especially if you want to see the amount of self-help activities that's going on in Texas. I don't know who else is capturing this or collecting this, but we've been doing it for several years, and it's always been helpful to see the amount of activities being offered beyond just cases. Any questions? Hopefully not, because I don't have all the answers. All right, next. Outcomes. We were ahead of the game in most of the country in terms of trying to collect outcomes. We've been collecting this since 2001, and there are still many legal aid programs that are not collecting this. This is to provide even more detailed information in terms of level of service as to what you were able to achieve. What was the outcome of your advocacy? And that's all you're trying to capture. And so, yeah, one thing that you should always keep in the back of your mind is that other is very easily a category to use or abuse. And if we see a large number of cases closed with other, and you say, well, they just didn't fit in one of the categories. So you can't have a perfect number of categories, but you have to do your best to try to put it in the most appropriate one. If there are several that you could put it in, you just make that decision as to the primary outcome, what you think would be more favorable to the client or to the organization. But if there's too many cases, well, what's too many? If there are a lot of cases in other categories, then we're going to be in touch with you and ask you to identify what type of cases are being put in there. And really, with just additional time, you should be able to find the right particular outcome. Also, there are three columns: cases closed, contested, cases closed, uncontested. Now, back in the CSR, those categories are referencing only court decisions. However, in this graph, these are all cases, regardless if there is any litigation, administrative advocacy, advice, or brief service. It doesn't matter. You would just, it'd either be contested or uncontested. And those two totals should equal your total for the case service report. So this is, again, one of the areas that you have to make sure they reconcile. And it's kind of embarrassing when you have different numbers in different sections when they should be the same. In terms of number of persons affected, we're just trying to show the greater ripple, the greater impact that your services are providing. It could be the number of people in the household that benefited. It could be a community group. It could be we have another definition. It could be most likely anything that in your good faith assessment benefited from your services. You would have to make sure that you'd have as a backup how you arrived at that, those numbers. But again, we want to show the greater impact, because many times it's just not the individual client, but many other people that are being positively affected. And this definition is, I think, provided in the opportunity in the document depository. All right, next. In fact, all these definitions are. Let's see, staffing. Again, we're just looking for full-time equivalent personnel devoted to legal aid. There are a number of grantees that do many other things besides just providing legal aid. Legal aid is just a component. We're looking for just the legal aid component, and paralegals is sometimes now turned into legal assistants, or in the immigration world, they would be accredited reps, representatives, but generally someone who's either support or delivering services under the supervision of an attorney. And normally other is administrative staff. And again, this does not just limit to TAGF funded. It's all funds that are supporting free civil legal aid to the poor. And in terms of university or law schools that we're funding clinical programs, again, we may fund only one clinic, and you may have several clinics that are providing civil legal aid to low-income people, and you should include, but we do not want criminal cases. That's a different category that we don't collect, but we would like to have the data on staffing for legal aid programs. Area of need, this is new. Actually, it's not new. It's just relocated. It was previously requested. And again, we're taking your data to help us tell a story, to help us identify with additional need is needed. Need is needed. That's redundant, but it's very, very helpful. And we use this data whenever we are doing any strategizing. All right, next.
And this is me.
Yep.
So these next two slides are going to be about volunteerism in your program, starting with pro bono volunteerism, which we all know is the kind of term used in the legal profession to describe when a private attorney provides free volunteer legal services to a person in need who qualifies as a person in need according to their ethical requirements. Data point 1 in this slide is under pro bono statistics, is looking for the number of pro bono attorneys. So we're looking, the data point is going to be a number of attorneys, of pro bono attorneys. The first one is going to be an unduplicated number of attorneys who provided legal representation during the period. So during the calendar year that you're reporting on. Data point number 2 is going to be legal representation first timers. These are not necessarily newly recruited attorneys. This may be the lawyer who volunteered to be on your pro bono panel 5 years ago, but there's never been a case she would accept or that you requested she take based on the parameters she gave you for case acceptance. So this may be not, you know, like I said, this person may be have been on your panel for a while, but this is the first time they've ever taken a client's case. Number of hours, the data point, the first data point is legal cases related as reported by the pro bono attorney. So this must be representation, legal representation, and the number of hours reported should come from the pro bono attorney's reports. The data point number 2 is non-case related, and an estimate in this case can be given. It can be training. Maybe they did a training for you, a CLE training, or legal education to a client group, co-counseling. That to me is case services, so I'm not sure why that's in there. It actually probably shouldn't be. We'll revise that. Co-counseling to me is that you're working on a case with someone, so that should be reported above. But mentoring on a case is different. That's helping the attorney, not necessarily helping the client. So that would qualify. So that's where you would record those non-case related hours. Then the number of cases, and this must correspond with the CSR, in meaning that it must, the amount should be equal to what was reported on the CSR for the cases closed by pro bono counsel. And the cases closed with limited services, limited advice, or limited action should be reported in data point 1. And then the cases closed with extended services. All cases should be included here. So data point 1 is going to include advice and counsel, and I'd have to look back, but I think it's going to include, correct me, Jonathan, if I am wrong, but I think it's going to include the first 2 columns and then the very last column. That's going to be limited action. Right. And then the data point 2 is going to be everything else in the CSR, all the other categories. Negotiated settlement without litigation, blah, blah, blah. Next slide. And next slide is, while the previous slide focused on volunteer pro bono attorneys, only this slide seeks to capture all volunteer efforts in your organization. So data point 1, if an attorney, support staff, which could be a paralegal, a social worker, a legal secretary, or a law student under law student category, provided volunteer work on cases, record those volunteers in the first row. That's case-related volunteerism. If they provided other services, for example, a social worker did a session for your staff on vicarious trauma, record that volunteer person in the second row. So non-case-related volunteerism in your organization should be recorded in the second row. The next section is dealing with the attorney in private practice who is assisting one of the grantee's clients for a reduced fee. Data point number 1 is the number of attorneys. I can't understand my own note. Provided case services during reporting period. Data point number 1 is the number of attorneys who provided case services during the reporting period. So that's going to be the number. The number there is going to be recording the number of attorneys. And then number 2, they provided other services, but you paid them a reduced fee to do it. So say you've got a bankruptcy manual or module and you paid a reduced fee to a local bankruptcy lawyer to review the module and update it based on recent legislation. Then data point number 2 would be the number of attorneys who provided services like that for a reduced fee during the period. And then data 3, that's the total number of people that are on your reduced fee panel that you might call to provide services for then the compensated rate that you list at the bottom of the report, the reduced fee paid by the grantee to attorneys who provide services in this category. And that is all. Thank you very much.
I was talking a few minutes and didn't realize I was muted. It's the story of my life. In terms of this particular slide, all I have to say about group representation is, again, it's an opportunity for us to collect the kind of advocacy that goes beyond just individual representation. If you're representing a group, in order to account for it in this report, though, the group has to either be made up of persons, primarily persons who would be eligible for free legal services, or the group primary purpose is to assist low-income people, and they couldn't afford private counsel. And then the top outcome just talks about what service was provided, and then the bottom is just what type of particular group, if you can categorize it. Again, it says other groups, so if we could try to refrain from other, we'd greatly appreciate it, because it really doesn't help us in terms of trying to articulate how funds are being used. All right, next. And dollar outcomes. This is an opportunity talk about the economic benefit that free legal aid provides, and it's very convincing, and has been successful in showing the opportunities that legal aid brings to communities. Every time you're successful in getting child support or Social Security, that's money that's coming into the community. It's going to be spent in the community. Cost savings, cost avoided. Again, it could be a estimated number on particular cases, but if you in good faith could record that, that would be helpful as well. A number of programs, grantees leave these outcomes blank and not thinking that there may be some economic benefit that your clients are receiving. And we would challenge you to think about it, because pretty much all legal advocacy has some economic impact, positive or negative. Hopefully positive. Again, this is very convincing. We have several reports from an economist that has put this in I think a great format that we share in terms of economic benefit to the state. Okay, next. And financial report. This is expenditures. This is an opportunity to identify how much it costs to run your legal aid program. And we also want to know, what portion of that is being charged to TAGIF grants and what portion is being used by other funds. It allows us to provide what percent of the TAGIF is supporting legal aid, the actual cost and expenditures. This is a calendar year report. Now, many times people feel that these numbers have to be audited, but really they don't have to be audited per se. We just really want to get an idea. And again, there are grantees that have legal aid is just one component. Just try to extract expenditures just on the legal aid side that is being provided by your organization. And I don't think I have any other questions. People are pretty good in terms of reporting this. All right, next. All right, sources. We spent a good deal of time. The American Bar Association Resource Center collects this information every year, and that is what funds, what revenues, and actually the Legal Services Corporation collects it from their recipients as well, grantees. What type of funds are being used to provide free civil legal aid in the state? Now, some of these definitions, these categories have definitions, and those definitions are in that reference component that we talked about earlier. You should review it because we need to have this consistent. For example, there's a federal programs other than LSC, and there's state and local. If you're getting funds from the state, but they're federal pass-through, then that money should be listed in federal. One of the benefits of the chart that we have, we list out all the type of federal funds there are that are being used for legal aid, and so that you're able to determine that whether it goes in federal or state. Also, the same is true. There's a little mix up in terms of foundations and private bar. Many times, the local private bar associations have a foundation, and that foundation may participate in providing, supporting an annual campaign. That money is really from the private bar, even though it came from a foundation. We need to have that listed in private bar, so we get a sense of exactly how much the private bar is supporting in dollars legal aid to the poor. What else? Court awarded, attorney's fees, client fees, self-explanatory, fundraising. That's fundraising outside of the private bar campaign. Some programs have an annual private bar campaign. That should be listed under private bar. If it's focused on general population or a non-attorney population, then it would come from fundraising. And on the other, you need to break down if it's more than 10% of the total revenue. Break it out as to how to account for it. And let's see. And this is where you would list. You break out all the sources, and they're very helpful. They really are. And we've been more and more reaching out to other funders or foundations, and if we know who's already funding legal aid, we can eliminate them in terms of who we're approaching or reaching out to. And I think that's all I have to say about that. And these are definitions that are, again, they're provided in the reference depository. Everyone should go through those documents that are going to be working on the self-assessment report before you start working on the self-assessment report. These are also particularly helpful, these documents, if you have a turnover in staff in terms of part of their orientation or training. And I think that's all I have to say about that. And well, we're 10 minutes earlier too. Well, I know people appreciate that. We will answer the questions that were provided, although we can take a couple of questions now for a few minutes. Janine, do you want to read a couple of questions?
Okay, yeah, 1 second.
Actually, let me answer one from Rachel Scheller. I was just answering it. Online, but I can answer it here. Her question is, how do I report when the attorney comes in to help us do pleadings, but does not take an entire case? We have a pro bono come in every week. How do I fit her in here? And so I'm going to the pro bono statistics. Can you go to pro bono statistics slide, Janine? I think it's slide number 22-ish.
26, I think.
I got one right there. Nope. Yeah, that one.
25.
I assume this is where you're asking how do I fit her in, but I'll do it on this slide and the next one. So here you're going to include her one time, she or he, I think you said she, one time under pro bono statistics, number of attorneys who volunteered and accepted at least one case. So you're going to include that attorney there one time in the first box, and didn't accept cases, so not at all in the second box, but did it volunteer and help to staff some cases. Reported hours, the hours that she worked on that case, any and all cases during the period of time when she comes in and drafts pleadings for you, then I would include those hours in the first box under reported hours. I would not include her work at all if she's not lead counsel or actually accepting a case under number of pro bono cases closed. And then the next slide, Janine. Here, I would include her under attorneys who provide case services during the reporting period. I would include her there. And that is all. Does that answer your question, Rachel?
I'm sure it does, yeah.
Okay.
That was a good explanation. All right.
Okay.
How about another question? Janine?
There's a question from Michael. Do volunteer law students get included in the pro bono volunteer total number? Does it make a difference if they have a 3L bar card?
They only get included in the screen that's showing right now under law students. They are not lawyers. They are not licensed to practice law.
Okay, and then there's another question regarding the CSR. So is the CSR just limited to pro bono and not staff?
No, I'll take that. The CSR is both. You know, there's a distinction. Pro bono refers to the volunteer lawyer, and it's not refers to free legal services. All right. So you could have staff attorneys deliver services and volunteer attorneys. The volunteer attorneys are considered pro bono lawyers. The staff attorneys are not considered pro bono lawyers because they're getting paid.
Just to clarify, Jonathan, sorry, he said that this is based on the question at the bottom of the pro bono statistic page.
Based on the bottom what?
Of the pro bono statistics page.
Cases closed with extended services? Yeah, oh, I'm sorry then. I thought you said CSR. Yeah, these are just volunteer lawyer data that's being solicited.
So did we get it answered, or do we need to?
They should have.
Hold on, I'm reading. If the question at the bottom of the pro bono statistics has to match the CSR case number, then the CSR can only be pro bono.
No, these numbers don't match. The number of case, because staff attorneys, I mean, grantees have, there are grantees that have both staff attorneys and a private bar program. So we want to capture all those cases in the CSR. On this particular section, it's just recording volunteer attorney information.
Yeah, I think the instruction is unclear, and that we maybe need to remove numbers must correspond with annual CSR in that section.
Agreed. Agreed.
Take care.
And I don't think an intended match. I think what an intended is, do not include any cases here that were not, you know, if you report, only include cases here that were reported in the CSR on behalf of pro bono work. But so it's a corresponding, not in a matching, but it's unclear. So just remove it.
All right.
Any more questions?
That was a good question.
There is another question here from Travis. Is there a place where referrals get reported to TAGIF, specifically if there was no client relationship developed before the referral?
No, I don't think so. Lisa or Isak, there's no referral information collected. Even under the self-represented section, something has to be delivered. There has to be a deliverable. And if people are just referring, now again, it goes back to
not. Yeah.
if they have to, actually they still have to record if they refer it with no service, and they had additional resources or capacity, as Lisa mentioned. That's actually one section that I think referrals might be captured. Right, Lisa?
Well, that's the reasons not accepted area, or yeah, there. Well, yes. In the earlier slide, let's see. That is slide number. I think it's 7. Janine, you go back to slide number 7. Okay, one more.
No, it's slide 10. There it is. You went by it.
This one.
Yeah.
So rejected applicants, number of income eligible applicants rejected before legal services were rendered. That is the place that you would refer a eligible person, a person who would be eligible to receive services, but you do not have the ability to serve. So you either rejected or referred. Either way, you rejected them. Whether you did anything else with them, you rejected them as a client because you do not have the ability to serve them. So not because of their income status or even their case status, their case type status. So this is where you would put referrals to other agencies as long as it meets other criteria that it's income eligible and it would otherwise be a civil legal aid case civil legal aid case.
But like you said, if it was a case that they just didn't handle, such as criminal, and they made a referral, you wouldn't record those
Do
numbers.
not record that there. Do not record that there. We are looking for eligible clients or eligible applicants, excuse me. The first question is going to be an applicant. So sometimes, like in earlier questions, I hear referrals of client or references to clients in the question when they're not really technically clients yet. I mean, they're not, a client is a term of art, obviously, in the law, and so they're not a client, they're an applicant, actually. If you did not accept them, if you did not provide any service to them that is law-related, legal service, and you did not, and an attorney-client relationship did not attach, then that is not a client, that is an applicant. And they can be recorded in that first box if they would otherwise have been eligible, but you could not serve them because of a lack of resources. That's what we're trying to get at there. That's the kind of information we can take to the legislature and say, in 2018, this many people were rejected or received less than the representation that they needed based on our inability in the state of Texas to provide these services because of resources.
Okay.
I think that's going to conclude this presentation. You should direct any questions that weren't answered to your program officer. And what we try to do is so we're consistent. We consult with each other and share with each other so that the interpretation or response is consistent across the board for everyone. We do hope that this presentation was helpful. If successful, then once you submit your self-assessment report, you shouldn't hear from us, hopefully, and there's no questions. And that would save your time and us as well. We do appreciate everything that everyone does. And we want to also plug the next week's presentation as well. Client stories, can do so much. So please make sure you participate. Anything else, Lisa or Isaac, Janine, you'd like to say?
Nope, thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Come in.
Nice job.
Huh?
Nice job.
What do you think?
It's good.
Jonathan, you're still on.
Am I still on?